In Cuba, the plan was to go slow. But the Spanish fleet slipped the blockade and landed troops into Cuba and rushed our plan to take over Cuba. General Miles, an American general, attacks Santiago, Cuba, with 17,000 troops and takes that city. In the Battle of San Juan Hill, which was part of that battle, Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders capture all the headlines for making a charge which was both foolish and heroic. It was brave, if nothing else, and reckless, up Kettle Hill. And Roosevelt will lose more than 100 of his men and become a great hero. He'll call it the great day of my life. He will be in all the newspapers, and the only thing most Americans will know about the Spanish-American War is that Teddy Roosevelt was a hero. Now, I should mention, Roosevelt was born into a wealthy family, had a promising career in politics until his mother and his wife died on the same day, and he kind of had a bit of a breakdown. He moved out west, wrote a 4-volume history of the West while living in, I believe, Montana, Wyoming, that area. Had come back, re-entered politics, had got an appointment through his family connections to be the Undersecretary of the Navy, and dreamed of this war. He actively wanted war with Spain and was excited when the chance came up, resigned his job as Undersecretary of the Navy, and went to lead his own hand-picked group of U.S. Army men in the war in Spain. He made the officers the guys he played polo with, and then he went down to San Antonio to the Menger Hotel, which for my kids is right down the road here. And he walked into the hotel bar there and said, I'm looking for a few good men. Because he had heard that Texas cowboys, he asked everybody, where can I find the roughest, toughest, bravest men in America? And everybody told him the same thing, Texas. That's how the legend goes anyway. And he went down there, and that's where we get the Marine slogan, by the way. You see, here's Buffalo Bill's Wild West show recreating the Battle of San Juan Hill. Of course, what they didn't recreate was the fact that it was mostly African-American soldiers who fought and won that battle. The U.S. actually stops the attack on Santiago due to disease, but the Spanish had already ordered a retreat, so the U.S. wins by default. Both sides kind of try to stop fighting at the same time. The Spanish try to run, but America is able to smash their fleet. Remember, they have wooden boats. And Spain surrenders Cuba to the Americans. The Americans take Puerto Rico unopposed. It's called the Moonlight Stroll. We just land and take over, and it's ours. And on August 12th, an armistice, a peace treaty is signed. Cuba was supposed to become independent. Puerto Rico, Guam are supposed to go to the United States, and the Philippines, that question will be resolved later, whether they'll be an American territory or their own independent nation. Puerto Rico had been part of Spain since 1508. That's not long after Columbus came, right? And by the early 1600s, of course, all the Native Americans had been gone. They had been replaced by slaves to work the sugar plantations and the coffee plantations, and now that's going to become part of America. Many Americans, so there's Puerto Rico. You see again this idea of the white man's burden, the civilized white man having to take care of the uncivilized and savage, backwards people that we're conquering. Many people are uneasy with the idea of controlling a people so remote. And I'm talking about the Philippines here. It was one thing to control Puerto Rico. That was right off our shores. It was another thing to control people on the other side of the world. Many people said, isn't this what America was founded to fight against? McKinley said we can't give them back to Spain or to another European power, and he said they are, quote, unfit for self-government. He said this, of course, because he was racist. Everybody was back then. And he says we will take them all and to educate the Filipinos and uplift and Christianize them, and by God's grace do the very best we could by them. Ironically, he says he's going to Christianize them. The Philippines, which have been controlled by Spain for centuries, was one of the most Christian, that is Catholic, places in all the world. Oh well. The Treaty of Paris of 1898 ended the war officially. We gave the Spanish $20 million. We got Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. The Senate actually pushed back against this. Many senators argued against us becoming an empire. They were called the Anti-Imperialist League. Not only were politicians involved in this, Andrew Carnegie, Mark Twain, Senator Sherman, Gompers, Samuel Gompers, the leader of one of the big unions, all opposed building an American empire. They argued that empires are anti-freedom. Others didn't like it because they didn't want to bring minorities into America as citizens. They said Puerto Rico's full of black people. The Philippines is full of Pacific Islanders. We don't want those people to be part of America because we want to remain white. Why were the unions involved? Well, they feared loss of jobs. They feared competition from these people for the jobs that were available. Some just feared having a large standing army, feared the growth of a military-industrial complex. This is way back in 1898. Sugar growers in America and Hawaii feared new competition. Hawaiians were actually against this because they saw Puerto Rico as competition to sell sugar. The pro-treaty, who favored the treaty? Who favored building this empire? Well, Teddy Roosevelt. This was his dream for America to conquer the world, really. Businessmen hoping to expand their markets into Asia. Republicans who saw it as a partisan issue. Republicans had been for the war, had been McKinley's war, and so they were on Team Republican and they supported it. To allay fear of new citizens and many Democratic and expanding Democratic voters, Republicans pointed to Native Americans and said, no, these people in these territories won't be citizens, they'll be dependents, which means they won't get the right to vote and they won't have full equality. William Jennings Bryan actually endorses the treaty, even though he hated the treaty, because he wanted it to be the primary issue of the 1900 election, which he would lose anyway. McKinley will also in 1900, in order to ensure he wins the election, make Teddy Roosevelt his vice presidential candidate. Not because he agreed with Teddy Roosevelt on policy. He thought Teddy Roosevelt was crazy. But Teddy Roosevelt had become the biggest, most well-known, famous, and beloved man in America because his kind of sort of heroics on San Juan Hill.